Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about how to break Strands of Fate in 10th edition. So a lot of you guys are well aware of how Strands of Fate works now, but some of you, especially the newer players, or maybe players who just haven't had that much time to, play with their armies and stuff like that, maybe haven't realized the most effective and efficient ways to use Strands of Fate. Yes, they can be used to proc devastating wounds, which is what everybody was doing with the Wraith Knight, and yes, they can be used for saves and charges and things like that. But there are a few tricks, especially with Farseers, that make Strands of Fate utterly insane. And it's one of the biggest reasons why Farseers are nearly an auto-include in most Eldar builds. I don't think they're an auto-include in every single build, but I do think in most builds they are an auto-include because of this just insane ability to change fate dice into a 6, not once per round, but once per turn. And to be able to use it to its maximum effectiveness in the enemy turn, you need to know a few things. So what we're going to talk about in this video is basically how to make Strands of Fate as broken and as powerful as it can be. So without further ado, let us jump right into it. But first, a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today. So the first thing is we're going to be doing a quick review on Strands of Fate and Branching Fates, which is the Farseer ability. We're going to be looking at which units and weapons work best with Branching Fates. And lastly, we're going to talk about how to maximize the effectiveness of Branching Fates itself. So for those of you who don't know, just a quick overview of what Strands of Fate is. So basically the Eldar faction ability is Strands of Fate. You roll 12 dice at the beginning of the game. You can re-roll these if you like, but you must roll one less each time. And the remaining dice, with the numbers they show, become your fate dice. And these will last for the rest of the game until you use them. So as per now, you can use the fate dice from your pool once per phase and substitute the roll for the number shown on the dice. So the number that was shown at the beginning of the game, that's what you can substitute your dice roll for. So you can basically guarantee something hits, wounds, causes damage, or makes a charge, right? So it can be used for advances, battle shocks, charges, damage rolls, hit rolls, saving throws, and lastly, wound rolls. It's important to note that you can't use Strands of Fate for any ability type stuff. You can only use Strands of Fate for these specific roles. Okay, so now that we've kind of briefly covered what Strands of Fate does, what does the Farseer ability Branching Fates do? So Branching Fates is an ability that Farseers and Farseer Skyrunners have, and you can change the result of a fate dice to a 6 if you use one within 12 inches of the model. So if you use a fate dice within 12 inches of a Farseer, you can use Branching Fates, which basically means that you can change the fate dice you use to an automatic 6. And this can be used once per turn in yours and in your opponent's turn. Now, the cool thing about this is some of you may already be thinking, this is a great way to get rid of your 1s, right? So you use a 1, which is normally useless. You're never going to want to use a 1 on a fate dice, right? You're never going to want to do that because basically you already get a 1 automatically, at least a 1 on any roll, right? And it doesn't have any tactical value. There's no more value to having a low dice. Like for example, last edition, it might actually be good to have a low number on a dice for leadership tests and things like that, but that's no more, right? So you always want high numbers, and because of that, 1s are useless. So you have a way with a Farseer to change all those terrible 1s that you get into 6s. So you change the worst to the best, which is an amazing ability and often why Farseers are mostly included in pretty much every list. Okay, so some of you may already be thinking, well, I already know what weapons and units Strands dice are best with, right? They're best with high damaging attacks. They're best with things like D weapons due to the devastating wounds. Even though it has been nerfed, it's still good, right? Ignoring armor and invuls is a powerful ability. Bright Lances are another great thing, right? You may be thinking Bright Lances is a great option, which they are, right? Pretty much anything with a Bright Lance can be effective with fate dice because of that ability to just automatically boost that D6 damage roll to a 6. So you can basically do an automatic 8 damage with a fate dice. So Vipers can take them, Warwalkers can take them, Hornets can take them, you can take one on a Falcon, on a Wave Serpent, etc. Wraithlords as well. So basically anything that can carry a Bright Lance, it's going to be good on. And lastly, some of you also may be thinking the Avatar of Khaine, right? The Avatar obviously is a fantastic recipient, not only to the saving throw, but also for his range attack with sustained hits D3. So you can use Overwatch, get an automatic hit, which automatically procs sustained hits, and you can just do a ton of damage with the Avatar on Overwatch to pretty much any target that's, large. Obviously, it's not going to do much against hordes, but against any really tough targets, they're going to have a hard time. And there's also just a bunch of other niches that you can use Strands Dice for. Now, Branching Fates, it's important to note that it's not just good with damage, right? There's other things it's good with that I didn't even mention, like advance rolls and battle shock tests. So if you really need an objective to be controlled one turn and your unit is below half strength, your Farseer can use Branching Fates to turn that into a 6. And same thing with advance rolls. You might have the opportunity to do a bunch of damage with the D-Cannon or a bunch of damage with the Bright Lance, but if you need to get to an objective and it's important and it's late in the game and it's a close game scoring-wise, you're probably better off going with the advance roll. So, And also keep in mind that if you do have other 6s in your Fate dice pool, you can still use those later in the turn. You can only use Branching Fates once, but you can use Fate dice once per phase. So the movement phase, when you would make an advance roll, is a different phase than the shooting phase. So if you have a 6 in your Fate dice pool and you have a 1 also, or another crappy number like a 2, you can definitely use Branching Fates for that too, boost it up to a 6, get that advance, and then use the natural 6, of course, in your Fate dice pool for that big damage roll. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay, so how do you maximize the effectiveness of Branching Fates? So as of now, there has been no FAQ saying that we cannot use Branching Fates or, Fate dice in general after you make your first roll and you're going to make a reroll. So my logic in the beginning of the edition was, this is an oversight. This is going to be fixed. They're going to say rerolls don't count for this, blah, blah, blah. Well, guys, I was wrong. GW has had plenty of chances to fix it, and they haven't. And they've nerfed a lot of things in the Eldar index. So I think they probably would have fixed that by now if they, basically interpreted it that way or designed it to be that way. So basically what this means is when you roll a dice with any model in your army that is a good candidate for Fate dice, roll the dice first, and then use Unparalleled Foresight to improve the odds of hitting, wounding, or dealing damage. Now, with dealing damage, obviously, you can't use Unparalleled Foresight because you don't get a reroll on that. However, keep in mind, Fire Dragons do get a reroll if you roll a 1 on damage. So that's something I've actually used recently, and it's worked to great effect. So let's say you're using a unit of Fire Dragons and you're going against a heavy target. Pretty much all of them will hit. Maybe you get 4 hits, and with the rerolls of, wounding that you get out of the Falcon, maybe 3 of them wound. Now, there's a 50% chance in there that there's going to be a 1. There might not be, but there's a chance for it, right? So my advice, roll the dice first, see what happens, and then if you see that 1, you can replace it with a 6 with a Fate die because you get that reroll. Now, obviously, you have to have a Farseer in range to kind of do that, but you can also just, if it's not, use the Fate dice naturally in your pool. So even though you may not be able to change a 1 to a 6, you can still use a natural 6. All right, so basically what am I saying by this? Well, use Unparalleled Foresight first, roll the dice first, and then see if you actually need to use a Fate dice on that particular roll. And yes, this was a little bit cringy for me at first, I have to admit, because, being able to substitute a Fate dice in for a reroll just always felt bad, and it was never legal in 9th edition. But now, since the wording of the rule is different, you can substitute it for any roll, rerolls included, rules as written, you can definitely use it that way. So use that to your advantage. The next point that a lot of you guys will probably already know, at least some of you veterans will know, is that you can use it on Overwatch for a guaranteed hit. So this was a combination that was super broken when the Wraith Knight and the D-Cannon were better, right? because you could use it with indirect fire and towering to basically ensure that you could hit anything within 24 very easily, and then obviously, proc devastating wounds naturally on a 6. So even though it wasn't guaranteed, you had about a 33% chance with a reroll of getting that 6 to wound once you, use the Strands dice to hit. So it was pretty insane overall. It was really hard for, opponents to actually deal with that effectively. Now, however, you do need line of sight. You can't use indirect fire or towering to overwatch. So, obviously the Wraith Knight can't overwatch because it's a Titanic model, and the D-Cannon certainly can't overwatch if you are out of line of sight. So, obviously, if the D-Cannon is within line of sight, you can do it, but the applications are going to be much fewer. However, it is good on things like Warwalkers. So Warwalkers are kind of that perfect middle ground of just tough enough to stay out of cover and maybe survive, combined with is actually strong enough and has a long enough threat range to make use of Overwatch. So it's one of those few units that kind of, actually succeeds at being good at doing it. So, definitely use it on Overwatch. If you shoot at an enemy vehicle and it's tough enough to get through your 2 Bright Lances, then when it moves the next turn, you can declare Overwatch right away and finish it off with 2 more Bright Lances to the face, one of which will be guaranteed to hit with Strands of Fate. And again, always roll first, right? We talked about this earlier with Unparalleled Foresight. Always roll first to see if you get that natural 6, and, that way you don't have to burn one of your Fate dice of a 6. Also, something to consider when maximizing the effectiveness of Branching Fates is the insane kind of movement hacks that you can use with Fire Dragons, Warwalkers, and Guardian Defenders. So with Fire Dragons, you can actually use Overwatch, and then you can Phantasm afterward. So Overwatch is when an enemy unit starts or ends a move. Starts is the key word here. So if the enemy unit within your range doesn't want to, just remain stationary, wants to go, somewhere else on the battlefield, they're going to need to suffer that Overwatch. So that is something they have to watch out for. Warwalkers are very good at this, and most of the time, Farseers are going to be in the back lines, at least the Farseers on foot, which means long-range things like Warwalkers are going to be their prime targets. Now, Warwalkers actually have a little bit of a dirty trick with a scout move that they can use. They can actually scout up before the enemy's first turn, and when the enemy makes his first turn, if your opponent moves within range with other scouting elements, like maybe, let's say, some scout sentinels, or, even perhaps some land speeders, right? Anything basically with 8 wounds or less, you can pop a free Bright Land shot at it and pretty much guarantee to at least do some damage to it. If not, just kill it outright. So there is a, kind of argument to be made of using the Warwalker scout move in that little tricky way. And of course, lastly, Guardian Defenders can move the Bright Lance platform out to shoot with the Bright Lance platform, and then if your enemy doesn't choose to shoot them or, moves with an engagement to shoot them, you can always move the Bright Lance platform back with Phantasm. So there are some movement hacks that you can do with Fire Dragons, Warwalkers, and Guardian Defenders with Branching Fates that you do need to look out for when playing your games. And mostly for the Fire Dragons, it's going to be in the form of a Farseer Skyrunner just because of the extra mobility. Okay, so one last point about Branching Fates, though. It is kind of a short range. It's not unlimited range. It only has a 12-inch range. So you do need to be aware that to be able to use this ability, you need to be within 12 of a Farseer. So Warwalkers, units like Vipers, Hornets, those are really easy to use Branching Fates with because they have a long range, right? But it's a little bit more difficult and tricky to use it with things like Fire Dragons because Fire Dragons are mostly going to be a short range unit that is going to be moving up with a Falcon or something like that, and you may not actually have range with the Farseer anymore after that. So you do have to keep that in mind. Something I've been fiddling around with, kind of messing around with in my lists, is trying to plug a Farseer in with the Fire Dragons. So basically you just plug one in with a Phoenix Gem into a Fire Dragon unit in a Falcon. They get out, and yeah, the Farseer won't be able to cast Fortune that turn, but has the Phoenix Gem, will probably survive, and can use Branching Fates on the Fire Dragons. Not only that, but probably going to be within 12 inches of the Falcon. The Falcon can always fire and fade behind terrain or something like that if you want to keep it safe. But if you want that Overwatch potential, a Falcon with a Bright Lance could be a pretty good solution. And also a pretty good target for Branching Fates to boot. Now, one last point about the Farseer and the Falcon is that it does get wound rerolls when it comes out against the target the Falcon hit. So if you're hitting, something a little bit smaller maybe, or even something that's, less than toughness 12, having a Eldritch Storm that can hit on a 3+, and then wound on a 5+ with rerolls could get you some extra damage. And that damage could be significant. So do keep that in mind as well. It might not be a bad idea to put a Farseer at least in a unit of Fire Dragons in a Falcon. But again, that's just something I want to try out. It may actually be terrible. Who knows? Okay, so we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but use Unparalleled Foresight to improve the odds of hitting, wounding, or dealing damage. So, like I said before, rules as written, you can substitute any dice you're about to roll for a fate dice, which includes ones you wish to reroll with Unparalleled Foresight. So always roll first to see if you get a natural hit or wound before using your fate dice. And remember, it is more valuable to use them for damage if you get the chance later on. So, to summarize Branching Fates on Overwatch, use it for a guaranteed hit. So if you can position a unit within 24 inches of an enemy, if they start or end a move, then you can Overwatch, which is essentially an additional attack that will auto-hit with the fate dice. And it works best with anti-large weapons versus large targets. Your Warwalker against an enemy vehicle or monster, for example, especially if they cannot afford to remain stationary. So if your opponent really needs to get to that objective to make sure they control that objective for victory point purposes, well, you're going to have to take a Bright Lance shot to the face first, So do give your opponent those decisions to make. They are going to be hard. Usually a good Eldar player will make it so that either decision is a bad one. Lastly, do not forget your movement, right? Don't forget the movement hacks that you can use with Warwalkers, Fire Dragons, or even Guardian Defenders. Warwalkers can use their scout move to move within range of an enemy or gain line of sight to a key firing lane an enemy large target must move through. And then, of course, you Overwatch, right? So if a Land Raider only has one avenue of travel through the ruins, park your Warwalker in a place where you can easily Overwatch it. Guardians and Fire Dragons can also move within range of their target. Fire Dragons can move within Melter range if needed, and Overwatch with the Bright Lance or the Fire Pike, and then Phantasm back. So, again, Overwatch happens before Phantasm, so you can Overwatch and then just Phantasm back as needed. And lastly, things to keep in mind when using Branching Fates. It only has a 12-inch range, so be sure your unit is still in range to use it when and if they move. And lastly, it can only be used once, but it can be used each turn, yours and your opponent's, so do remember that as well. So, in conclusion, with all the powerful ways you can use Branching Fates to boost your anti-large performance, it's no wonder why Farseers are considered near auto-includes. And, it doesn't stop there. Branching Fates can also be used in so many different ways. It has so many great applications, right? It can be used in basically any phase. It can give you an auto-advance 6 to move. It can give you a auto-pass Battle Shock. It can give you a maximum damage attack. It can guarantee you a hit on Overwatch. It can just do so much for your army. And that's usually, again, why Farseers are auto-includes in most Eldar builds. However, the key to using it properly lies in the units that you use it on and the appropriate spacing to maximize its effectiveness. So again, it only has a 12-inch range. You do need to be cognizant of that when you're moving your models. And you do also need to be cognizant of other ranges as well. Overwatch, for example, does only have a 24-inch range, so you do have to also keep that in mind when moving your units into position. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. Your help has helped the channel improve greatly, and I really appreciate the support. We just hit 2,500 subscribers, so that's a great milestone. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for everything. I really do feel like we're building up the community in a really positive way, so thank you so much for helping that happen. If you do want to become a Patreon member and help support the channel, I do have free trials activated which will give you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description. Also, if you are interested in grabbing some Eldar-inspired apparel to rep your local game store, or grab some discounted Eldar miniatures, I am an Amazon affiliate, and I do have a channel store page, and I will leave those links in the description as well. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Have some great games this week, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.